All right, now let us first of all make sure that we go into our workspace. And so our workspace is located on our desktop, most of us, and it is in full stack. Then I'll create a folder called grid layout like this. Then I'll just go into it by just using CD, which is change directory, and let me hope everyone is now used to this, because we are always going to start our project like this. Even your own projects, this is the same way you'll be using. So please let me hope everyone understands this. And now we can open this folder in our VS Code using code space and a dot. Please always remember to put there a space. So we can now verify that we have opened the right folder by just looking up here. And we can notice that we are on our grid. We are within our grid layout folder. I'll just go ahead and create an index.html as well as an index.css. Now I am not going to use folder called CSS. I hope you are all used to actually finding the path of files, even though they might be nested in other folders. So I'll straight bring up a boilerplate of HTML by just doing an exclamation mark. Then I'll delete the metadata and then change the title of this page to grid layout. Then I'll link this HTML page to my CSS, which is index.css. And now if I want to verify that my CSS file is linked to my HTML, I can just come into the body and just do like background color of black. If it changes to black, then it means it is now linked to my HTML. I will open this by just going live, and you can see now our background is black, which means we have linked our CSS correctly. So now, let us start our lesson of grid layout. So I hope most of you have went through the session of Flexbox layout, which is quite different from this, because Flexbox can actually give you a layout that is in one dimension, which is either row or column. But grid layout can give you any layout that is in different dimensions, right? And if I would define what CSS grid layout is, so this is a built-in module within CSS that helps us divide pages into major regions. So that is our first thing we need to understand. It is just a functionality, a CSS functionality that actually gives us ways of dividing our pages into regions, different regions in whatever dimensions. And also making sure that the regions we have divided or the grid items we have are positioned in whatever ways we want. So consider, let me actually write this so that you understand it clearly. Let me create a readme.md, and then I'll go ahead and just do a grid layout. So I usually do a readme so that you guys can also get used to Markdown language. So whenever we have files with MD, this is Markdown language. And you can always write your Markdown inside here using its syntax. So when we have one hashtag, it means that is a heading 1. So a heading 1 means it's our largest heading title. Then we can write some paragraph without just putting anything by just writing. Let me first define what a grid layout is, but before I define, let me put there a sub heading, which is heading 2. And I'm going to say definition of a grid layout. So now I'll just say grid layout is a built-in CSS module that helps us to divide a page into major regions. So this is the definition of grid layout. So consider grid layout also as the same way a table looks. We've seen how to do tables in HTML. You've seen that a table usually have rows and columns. So consider a grid layout as tables, But the good thing for flex grid layout, it is powerful enough to actually give us the ability to move elements within the grids or within the columns and rows in any place we want. So that is the difference between grid layout and tables. We can achieve almost the same thing when we are using tables, the same way we can do it with grid layout. But everyone who is going to look into your code and see that you're using tables as a layout, they will actually say that you're not using best practice in general, and you won't have the exact beauty of your page as you may want it. So it is actually better to use grid layout, but have in mind that it has some similarities as tables. And it is more powerful to give you the ability to move your elements wherever you want. So now, if I would now move on with some of the concepts, let me just do a second subtitle, and now I move on with concepts in grid layout. So we have concept almost the same as, but different in a way, the same as flex layout. So we usually have a display. So the display property is also available in flex layout. And we also have grid, template, rows. These are properties, CSS properties. I'll come back to this. I'll repeat again what a CSS property is. So, and we also have grid template column, the same way we have grid template row. And we also have grid gap. This is also another property. We also have grid column and grid row. We can also use other CSS properties with grid layout concepts. So we shall be seeing a mixture of grid layout concepts as well as some other CSS properties like padding, margins, and so on. So there are also many other properties, but today we are going to mainly focus on these ones, and you can read more about everything and understand more about some advanced concepts of grid layout. I'll also share you some resources once we finish this session. I usually don't provide you links within the chat because I need you guys to always remember what we have discussed within these sessions and to always go back to the videos and check. So please make sure you always repeat and watch the videos in case you didn't understand something or in case you are lost somewhere. So now let us continue with our HTML. So we are now going to start using the grid layout so that we can see how it would look like. So inside here, I'll start with a div. And the same way we have a flex container in Flexbox layout, the same way we also have a grid container in grid layout. So we shall start with the container or the parent container, and we shall give it a class of grid container. It is not a must to name it as grid container. By the way, these names, you can just pose your own names, but make sure, please, they're relevant. I'm using grid container because I'm trying to refer. We're using grid layout, and this is a container for everything that is going to be used within this page. So now, inside the container, we can have in other divs that might be called grid items. The same way in flex layout, we have what we call flex items. So I'll give them a class name of a grid item, and I'll make sure that I provide the same class name to the rest of the items. All right, so I normally like to use 3 items, but you can use more than 3 items. Let us actually today use 4 items. Let us not always use only 4 and only 3 items. So right now we haven't yet put any CSS. Let me even actually remove everything that is there. So we haven't yet written any CSS. If we come back to our page, we won't see anything displayed because within our grid item divs, we don't have anything. So let us put in item 1, item 2, item 3. Let us put there grid item 1, grid item 2, grid item 3, and now lastly, grid item 4. So right now, if you look at our web page, so we just have raw things. We don't have any style in this. We just have some text showing up and not even appearing to be great. So now let us apply there some styling. So I'll just collapse this and I'll bring my, so when you're in a VS Code and you want to search for a file, you can always do Command P if you're using a MacBook, and I don't remember for Windows laptop, but it's probably a Control and P. You can try it. So if you do Command P, you will get on top something where you can write your files and you can see even some of the files you have. But if you have so many files, then you need to search. But right now, because I only have 3 files, I can obviously see all of them. So I need the index.css. I'll drag it to the right so that we can have two sides show up, so that we are going to be writing our CSS as well as observing our HTML. So the first thing we need to do, as we also do the same thing in grid, and I mean in Flexbox layouts, it is to first make sure that we style our container. So what is the mistake here I've made? I need to ask somebody from you guys. I've intentionally made it, and I need somebody to tell me if I have any error within the way I've written my CSS. So I'll just ask Jose. Mic check, Jose. Is it Jose or Jos? Or I'll be saying Agustino.
Yes, Jose is right pronunciation.
Okay, perfect. So what is the mistake I've made here? I've made it intentionally. So what do you think the mistake or the error?
Don't have those two things up.
A dot.
Yes. So the thing we are missing is a dot, just a dot. I know we're still missing some CSS properties and values, but the basic one we are missing is a dot. So if you're styling and you have chose class names within your divs or within your HTML elements, whenever you'll be writing the class name, you should always start with a dot. And if you're writing or if you're trying to do some CSS of an element, like let's say body, you just need to write that tag and then in your curly braces, write in your styles. Then if it is an ID, you just need to start with a hashtag, then the ID name, then your curly braces, you write your own styles. I'm always letting you, I'm always repeating this, guys, so that you can get used to this, right? And you can write more CSS by just writing a comma and put there any other class name. If we have any other class name like Flex container, even though these cannot happen at the same time, but I just want to show you, you can always have more than one classes applied on one line if you want to give them the same styles that will be inside here, right? So as I was saying, we'll start with a grid container and make sure we give it a display of grid. In Flexbox layout, we start with display flex because it's Flexbox layout. But right now we're using grid layout. Then we start with a display of grid. If we come back to our page and we try to see if there was any change, you won't actually see any change. For Flex, you will immediately see the change. But for the grid, you won't see the changes until you write styles related to rows and columns. As for it, it's mostly two-dimensional. It can be either one-dimensional or two-dimensional, which means it can have both row and columns. Whereas Flex can now have Flex row and Flex column at the same time. It is either row or column, right? That is why we call it a one-dimensional layout. So now, after writing our display as grid, then we will need to also specify our grid template rows and grid template columns. But before we do that, let us first make sure that we can even actually view these things with a certain height and width, or with just a certain height and a certain background color, so that we can differentiate them. So they are related, these styles we are going to write, they are related to the grid items themselves. So we'll start with a dot because we are going to use a class of grid item. And this class is these styles are going to be applied to all of these children divs because they all have the same class names, right? So now I'll just put in a background color of Dodger blue, and you can see every container or every item has its blue. It is just that they are close to each other, and you can see they almost look as if they're in one container, but in one div, but they're in different divs, as you can obviously see. But if you put in some spacing, you will see that. Now, after giving it a color, let us also give it no, let us not give it the height because I want to use the height from the column, the grid template column. So now let us go and start using our grid template column. If you start typing, you will actually see some suggestions. Now, so let me first clarify this, columns and rows. So what do we call rows and what we call columns on things that look like tables or grids? You all know grids, how they look like, right? So they're like tables with columns and rows. So what do we call rows and what do we call column? Last time we explained it when we were learning tables. Let me try to bring up this. So can you see this? So these ones that are being highlighted, they are called what? Are they columns or rows? The ones that are being highlighted.
Rows.
These are rows. So, and how about if I move on? Obviously, these will be columns, right? Because you have already identified the rows. So the rows are these items that are already on the same direction as the main axis. The main axis is the x-axis, right? So if now we say that we need, let's say we need rows of a height of 200 pixel, and also let us say we just need rows with a height of 200, because if we are defining rows, then it means that we are kind of defining, yes, the horizontal lines, but that number is defining the height of those horizontal rows. And if you even try the same thing in Excel, you'll always see something like resize. Is it resize? Yes, specify the row height. So this is the row height we are specifying here. So if now we come into our page and we try to look at that, you can see what is happening, right? You can obviously see what is happening because we only have one row specified here. We have only one row. And to make this clear, let us put there a row gap and just say a row gap is 10 pixels so that you can see this very clear. So you can now see it very clear because we have some gap between the rows. So can you see that the first row was given height? Why? Why and grid item 2, grid item 3, and grid item 4 without a height? This is because if we just write like this is how grid templates work. Anything you see in CSS with template, it means you can provide more values. So we have only provided 200 pixels for the first row. This pins for the first row. If we had another 200 pixels, this will mean for the second row also. Any item on the second row now will be also given a 200 pixel. Let us now take a look. We expect grid item 2 now to also have a height of 200, right? So if we come and check, we shall now see that our grid item 2 now has a height of 200. If we want to do the same thing for grid item 3 and grid item 4, we should also put there 200 pixels and 200 pixels again. It means if you have 4 items, then you need to specify all its heights, right? You can now see they are equally spaced, right? And if, let's say, if we have a lot of items here, then are we going to write every time like the height of every element and so on? We are going to end up having a lot of 200s and so on. And in coding or in programming, there is always a way to have some shortcuts. So we use a function called here repeat. So repeat is a CSS function that actually gives you the ability to be able now to repeat the same thing multiple times. So we want to repeat the same thing 200 multiple times. But why aren't we having now our 200 there? Because repeat takes in more than one, it takes in more than one argument. And what is an argument? So even though we shall come to that later on when we start JavaScript, but arguments are usually items provided within a function. So this is a function, as I said, you will understand all of that, but just understand it as a CSS function for now. But once you start learning JavaScript, that is when you're going to know a lot on functions. But just know functions are just utilities there to help you achieve a certain task, right? So now repeat takes in two parameters or arguments. The first one should be the number of times it should repeat. So let me say I have 4 items. Now it is going to repeat 4 times. And then the second parameter should be the height or the size of your height. So this is how it works. So parameters are separated with a comma. So if we come and look now in our browser, we can see we have our items repeated 4 times. So this is the same as we had written 200 pixel, 200 pixel, 200 pixel 4 times. You can use the repeat function to repeat the process for you, right? Are we clear here so far? Do we have any questions before we move on to columns? All right, we don't have any questions as of now. So before we move on to columns, let me also introduce you to something that we call fractions in grid layout. So a fraction, it is a unit. And for those of you who have learned math, you already know what a fraction is. So if I remove this 200 pixel and I just put there 1 FR and we come and look at this, so what it is going to do now, it is going to do 4 times this with a fraction, like they're going to be of equal size, right? But for the row, you can't actually visualize this very well. When we come to columns, that's when you're going to see how fractions now can differentiate. So this is the same as flex grow, where we can have flex grow with a ratio of 1 or 2. And if one has a ratio of 2, and the other one has a ratio of 1, it means the one with the ratio of 2 will be bigger than the one with the ratio of 1. Even here, the one with a bigger ratio, or I mean a fraction, will be bigger than the one with a lower fraction. We shall come back to that when we do columns, because that is when we can actually get to use it very well. So now, because the reason why we usually use columns, why we usually use fractions on columns, it is that on screens, we need to make sure that we manipulate the width of screens very well. Because all the devices, what differentiates them, it is the width. It is not actually the height in programming. Because when we are even doing responsiveness or when we are trying to achieve a beautiful or a better view on devices that are small, we care about the width, not the height. Because for the height, you can always scroll down. But for the width, you can't scroll left or right. That is a total mistake. Responsiveness means to make sure that the things are decreasing as you also decrease your screen, right? All right, perfect. So now let me close this. So now let us now move on with our grid template columns. So now let us introduce now our grid template column. And for the columns, of course, you understand, we have seen it, the columns are the vertical lines. So let us say now, right now in our design, we only have rows, we don't see any column. We are just having rows. We don't see any column. By saying we don't see any column, it's because we only have one column. By the way, there is a column, of course. So we only have one column, but let us try to achieve two columns. So if we put there columns that are maybe 300 pixel, if we just do 300 pixel, it will decrease this to 300. If we want to achieve two columns, then you need to do the same thing, three pixel. So right now we don't see any lines here. So because we only have row gap. So but let us try to put there also a column gap of 10 pixel. So if we put there a column gap, we can now see we have some gap within the columns. So you can see now we have two columns, right? So if we continue and put there another 300 pixel, you can now see we have three columns. So this one, the grid item 4 is moving to the next row because we have enforced only three columns, right? So if we enforce four columns, it means this one will no longer go to the next row. It will now straight go to our fourth row. So if I just do 300 pixels again, you can see it has now moved up to our row. Right now, we have only one row and four columns. And you can see when we always have columns, the rows will be overridden in a way, even though we have four rows here, but it will not enforce four rows straight, unless if we add more items. Let's say if we add more items like this, you see, they will now go to the next line. Now we shall have our rows, right? But if we have items that can fit in the column, so you won't see any other row, even though it is there imaginably because we have four rows, right? But always the column will override, right? So now we can do the same thing by just doing repeat and then 4 and 300 pixels like this. It's the same thing. Then let me show you the fraction thing, how it works in columns, because we are now dealing with the width rather than the height. So if we come and do one fraction and you come and check, do you see what happens? It will divide all the four columns into equal fractions because you have done one fraction, right? I hope you can clearly see that. And if you minimize this, you won't see any responsiveness because you will need to specify also the responsiveness depending on the items inside, if they can fit or not. And that one will be in the topic of responsiveness. But you can also achieve responsiveness out of the box in grid layout. I'll show you how to achieve that when we shall be working on a real example, on a real world example. So now, you saw how we can use grid layout by just making sure that the display is grid. And we also saw the grid templates, rows and grid template columns, and as well as the gap, both row gap and column gap, right? So let us also see how now we can style the grid items with some grid properties. Some grid properties like the grid column and grid row as we saw in our README. We are now going to use this. For the seventh one, we did the grid column. So let us now see how we can, what is this? The grid gap, right? So now let us see how we can use the grid column and grid row. So grid row and grid column are only applied on grid items, right? Because now we want to style differently from the default way the items inside our grid container. So now, let me first, let us just style like the first grid item, this one. So to target the first grid item, how can I write the styles without giving it another class? I need somebody to tell me the CSS selector that I can use without putting here any other class like item one. I just need to still use grid item. So somebody to tell me how I can now write my class selector. Anybody? I can see Joshua Ishime. Joshua's Ishime mic is on, and David Ntori's mic is on. Do you guys want to answer this question?
Yeah, can I try?
Yes, yes, Jose.
You can go ahead and write hash
Like this?
and yeah, greed item, double dot, nth,
Like this,
nth,
like this, yes.
yeah, nth,
Nth child,
nth child, yeah, one,
and then we specify one, and then we put there our stuff. But the only mistake you made was this hashtag, because the
yeah,
hashtag, it is if we have ID here, like this.
yeah,
But we now have class, so therefore, if we have class, we can do a dot instead of a hashtag. We only use hashtag if we have
ID,
an ID attribute. So
yeah,
you can do this, but as well, you can also do another one called first child, because in HTML, in CSS, there is first child and last child pseudo keyword. So you can use first child, and there is also last child. So the two are available. If you don't want to specify first or last child, then you can always use nth child. But right now, we just want to specify. There is no second child, by the way. There is no second child. There is only first child and last child. So if you want to specify other things, you need to use nth child, whereby you can specify if it is the first child or second child or third child or fourth and so on. But right now, we just want to specify the first child, then we can go ahead with. So when we use first child, it is going to grab the first child. There is no second child, as I said. There is last child, there is first child and last child. If we do last child, it will grab the last child. And if you want to now grab items randomly, instead of using first or last child, you can use nth child, because you're trying to give now an index. So if we put there 1, we'll be targeting the first child. If we put there a 2, we'll be targeting the second child, a 3 targeting the third, and the fourth one. That is how it works. So I was asking you now, I want to target this. So we should use nth child, and we put in a 2. Then we can go ahead with our curly braces, and we can do whatever we want. So let's say I want to do a grid row. Let us first start on the grid row. For the grid row, you can see this item 2 is on the first row. Can you see that it is on the first row? Now, if we say I want it to be on the second row, this is how it should change. You can see item 2 was moved to the second row. Can you see that? Can you see that? If you can't see that, please let me know. I repeat. We were targeting this grid item 2, and we said we are changing its default behavior. We want it on grid row number 2. This is row 1, and this is row 2. That is why it had to move to row 2. Can you see that?
yeah,
If we want to move item 3, this item 3 to row 2, it is going to be the same thing. Now we shall be having grid item 3, right? And now let's say we want to use the same time grid row, grid column. We want to put it on a column of 4. It is on row 1, but as on a column of 4. Where should it be? Let me comment this, and you tell me here. Where should now this grid item 3 go?
It should go at the fourth column, but still in the second row.
It will go on the 4th column. It will go around here. You can see my cursor. It will go around here. This is where we expect it. Now, if we uncomment this, you can see it went there, because it is still second row. You can see it on second row, but 4th column here, right? This is first column. This is second column. This is third column, and this is 4th column. Do we now understand this very well?
Yes.
All right.
I have a question.
Yes, please. Is it Batista asking?
Yeah.
Yes, Batista.
Okay. I have seen that whenever those divs has the same class, we can access any div according to its index. But like those grid items are in the grid container. What if we wanted to like access the the first element in that grid container, or any indexed number in that grid, but depending to that the grid container is the parent of that thing.
Exactly. What we are doing is what you're asking, actually. We can't even use this if we don't have a container here. We are able to do this because we have already a container here. Can you see this? Because it will already know that this is being considered as a child, because you can see this is a parent, right? And these are all children. So when we talk of children, children are everything that are inside or nested into another element. The element itself, it is going to be the parent, and the inserted element are going to be children. So if we want to get the first child, which is grid item 1, we just need to do first child like this. I wish there could also be second child, third child, and fourth child, but that would be too much. We would end up now having 100th child. Imagine now writing like 100th child. That wouldn't be correct. So they had now to impose another way of nth child, whereby you can now specify the index. If you have an index of 2, it means you're targeting this child. And you're able to do these child things because they are already children, because they are under a certain container. CSS will automatically know that they are inside a container or a parent. And if you want, you can actually do other styling without using the nth child and so on. Like this. This is an alternative now, Batista. So you can come here and do item 1 like this. You can have more than 2 class names, and more than 2 class names, actually, more than 1 class name in 1 class attribute. So you can also do item 3. You can also do here item 4. And now you will just come here, instead of all of this, you can just come and specify item 2. That would be the same thing. It will be the same thing, you can see, right? But again, you don't have to impose in for best practices. You don't have to put in another class. You can still use the same class and use pseudo properties to target your element you want, right? I hope that one is clear. I hope, Batista, I answered your question.
Yeah, sure.
All right, so now let us keep it as grid item. And now we are targeting, let us now target our first child. Let us keep targeting our first child. And now this first child will be moved. We're now targeting this first child. So now we want it on row 2 and on grid column 4. So if we refresh, it wasn't refreshed. That was why we were seeing grid item 3. It will now come from this position to here. So you can see we are now changing the default behavior of items themselves by just using grid row and grid column. But grid row and grid column cannot only be used for this. It is used for something more powerful and more popular than this, which is actually going to help you now be able to change your layout. So let us now see how we can use that. So let me show you one simple thing. Let me just have here a grid column, and somebody will explain this. Let us see this, and also have grid row of 2. I missed a semicolon here. So so can you see what is happening? But this one can't be, let me just remove, because we only have, let me just do this. Let me just do this for now. So who can tell me what is happening here by just visualizing this? Should I go back to the diagram? So again, just reference to what I've just told you, or let us start with one. Let us start with only this one. So this is now what is happening. So who can tell me what is happening here? So remember we are targeting this item 1, right? And we have said 2 out of 3. What does the 2 out of 3 mean? You can see item 1 where it was now moved.
I guess you say that the first item should start at the second row.
Yes, that is true. This is the grid column. It is not. Where is the grid column? Where is, like, how should we explain this? Why did it is the first child. I want you guys to use your brain. Why did it have to change now to this position? This one. Sorry. And you guys remember last time I had told you to read more about this. Let me go
I
back
think it's
to the book.
something related to the grid lines.
Yes, you're almost there. So it is
Starting
something
from
related to the grid lines in reference to the columns. So there is, even though we are not seeing the lines here, but they're there. So there is the first line here, there is the second line here, and there is the third line here. So now try to explain it.
so that item should start from the second grid line and end at the third grid line.
It should start from the first.
Sec- Second grid line.
The second grid line is here. As we said, there is like a line which is invisible here. Here, this is the
Yeah.
second one, and this is the third one,
the third-
right? So now another question that follows, but I want somebody else to answer this. I hope you understood this. I hope you understood. This is the syntax of start and end, like this, right? This is sort of the syntax we want. So let me put it here as a comment like this. So this is the start line and this is the end line, right? Do we all understand this? Because I'm later on I'm going to give you an assignment related to this, guys.
Now explain the end line.
So let me explain as he has just answered. So can you see my cursor? You can all see my cursor. Try to see where I'm trying to point. So on grids, there are always lines displayed, even though we're not seeing them displayed, but there is a grid line here, right? And there is also a grid line here, because we are referring to columns, right? There is also a grid line here, there is also a grid line here, and there is also a grid line here. So now we are saying our item should start from grid 2, because there is grid 1 and then grid 2. And it should end now to grid 3, right? So what if now we do here 4 like this? Can you see how it will now look? So now let me explain. So the first one is the start. It is the second line. Remember I said this should be the first line here, and this should be the second line. And now there is another column here, even though it is not visible, which is the third one, and now the fourth one. Now the fourth one will cause this item to span. So in other words, we use start and end to span elements. Now I'm going to ask a question. Now let me just comment this. and it goes back to normal. Now I want this grid item 1 to occupy from here. Can you see my cursor? To occupy this, to occupy from here up to here. This means that it will have a longer width and all the others will move down. Right? How should we now do our things here? I need it to start from here and occupy all the way along up to here. So our start is going to be, our start means the first number we are going to put here. As you can refer to this, it is going to be 1 because we are targeting this first line. And our end is going to be
4.
Our end is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4. I hope you understand. I hope the rest of you guys are understanding this. Can you see now? It was spun or it was pushed up to the 4th line and the rest had to move down. That is the beauty of grid. When one element is pushed, the other ones are forced to move on. Like we don't have an overflow, right? It will move on to the next line immediately. We can't have an overflow. If we try to do this in Flex, we'll end up having a scroll on our horizontal. We will end up scrolling like this, horizontally. But for grids, all the other items will move now down. So now, this is another thing I want to do. I also want this grid item 3, this one, this item 3, to occupy up to here. It will come from here up to here. And this one also should occupy from here up to here. I don't know if you're trying to picture what I want to achieve.
Yeah.
So I want this grid item 3 to come from here or to span from here up to here. So it is grid item 3. Let us first deal with it, grid item 3. So how am I going to do grid item 3? Now I'm just going to do grid item. Now I'll just use nth child. I'll put in 3. Then how should I write a grid column?
Grid column.
1.
It
One
will
by
be 1
three.
out of 3. So
3.
this is 1, 2, 3. I'm doing this so that, guys, I help you to understand how it is counted, right? 1 out of 3. And you can now see it spanned up to here. And now I want to do the same thing for grid 4. I want to see now those who have been following from when we started. I want this grid item 4 to start from here. Here, you can see my cursor, up to the end. In other words, it will be the same width as this grid item 3. How should I do?
Should start from 3 and
So am I going to do this? How am I going to do? I know I'm going to do grid item, then nth child of what?
4.
4, because it's the 4th child. Then I'll do from where? Grid column up to
3 by 4.
3 up to 4. And now
5.
nothing happened. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4,
5.
5.
Oh, 5. Oh,
Then it
good.
will be 3 out 5. Then you can see we achieved a beautiful layout. Can you see that layout? So on your website, you will need to do something like this. You will need to achieve a layout that looks exactly like this. I hope you understand what I'm trying to mean. Did you see how we achieved a beautiful layout by only using these tiles? Trust me, if you want to achieve something like this using Flex Layout, you can try it. You'll see how many CSS you write. They will be longer than these 24 lines. Right?
Yeah.
Grid layout is so beautiful when it comes to working on complex layouts. Right? But guys, please make sure within this session, you understand this. Because this is our main, I would say our main objective for this session. I need you guys to understand this. And I liked somebody who actually brought the idea of lines I wasn't going to teach you using lines. I was going to teach you using another complex equation thing. Because usually this ending, usually the way it is put into an equation, it is different from the lines. But I also learned using lines as whoever answered, I didn't see whoever answered this, but thanks to bringing up the lines thing, it is easier to do this when you're referring to lines. And the same should be applicable to also rows. Try to play around with rows, now having grid item rows and so on. Can we do the same thing and you see how it works?
Yeah.
Let's actually try to do the same thing. Let us now try to do this. I'm going to duplicate these things, right? So that I can have here 1, and then I can have here 2. Of course, our styles will be gone, but if we put here a 1, then we should be back with our things. But I also want to see this one. And why is okay? Yes, it's down here. I was wondering why it is not displaying. It's because of the other columns we have. But if we come and put here a column only 2 rows, we should be good to go. It will now come up. And now we can first of all make sure that in our grid container 2, before we even do the display, let us first put a margin top of 20 pixels to put in a difference here, right? So we can even actually do this. Why not this? We can do now grid rows, and here we can do grid columns. Make sure that you guys understand how it works differently, right? So now, let us now try to style this with grid rows. So I'll be copying some styles, of course. Let me copy these styles because they are the same. You can see. So now, here we also have items. I'll be putting there item 2, to differentiate, just for differentiating with the above, item 2. And now I'll copy also these tiles here. Then this one, I'll just give it another color, which is, let me see the colors by default here. This one, this one maybe. Did I change anything?
The name are not the same.
Yeah, those are not the same. Thanks. So now I should have some colors here, but I don't have any height. That is why probably. Let's see. No, we should also have item here. Item. Yes, right? Like this. But why aren't we having a background color? So, oh my goodness. So it's 2 instead of 1, right? So now we should be able to see our colors, right? So now we're going to try to do the row thing by using the same formula. Now we were counting lines like this. First line, second line, third line, fourth line, fifth line. But now we'll be counting like this. First line, right? Second line. Can you see this? Right?
Yeah.
So, but let us try to have a different view. Maybe let us try to have 2 columns. Let us try to have only 2 columns. If we have 2 columns, it will look like this. I just want us now to have a good one. So now we want this grid item 1 to occupy 2 columns. We're going to use the same thing. We're going to use the same formulation. So we'll now just come on dot grid item 2, and then we shall be targeting the first child. And then instead of grid row, we are going to use grid. Instead of grid column, we are going to use grid row, right? Now we'll be targeting the first line, right? The first line, we'll put a 1 here, and the end will be, because we want this to span from here up to here, and the end will be 1, 2, 3, and the end should be 3, like this. Can you see what happened? Can you see that? So it had to span until row number 2. And what is the reason of grid item 4 being less smaller in height? What is the reason? Why did we increase? I don't want you guys to confuse this. I don't want you to confuse that because we increased the size of this is what affected this grid item number 4 to be very smaller. It doesn't have the same height as this, right? It should have the default one as these ones. Why? If you want to see it in the codes, I'll just go back to the codes. You can see it from here. And the reason actually lies from here.
I think that is because we have only set the grid template rows to be 2
To
with
be
200 pixels.
exactly. So we already have column 1, column 2. I mean row 1, row 2. They are of height 200. Only that this one got a span of twice because we used the grid row property. But this one has just now went to the 3rd row, and we don't have a 3rd row specified here. That is why it is now having no height of 200. But if we come and change this to 3 rows now, it means it will now have a larger height because now we have 1, 2, 3, 3 rows, right?
Yes.
So guys, if you understood this, you're in the right path. You shall now be using grid row and you will enjoy it. So, but before we end, let us now create a real world example. Let us create something like a gallery. Let's create a gallery in grid, right? Very simple. We do it quickly. So we just say gallery.html, and now we shall use also gallery.css. So you guys will be guiding me. So we put here a boilerplate. We remove this and we will link our CSS, gallery.css. And now we'll come and just let us have the same thing. So we have a div, and this one we can name it. Let me name it with a different name so that you don't cram that it shall always be grid container. Let me just say gallery container. And inside here, we should have a lot of divs like this that will make up a gallery. And inside this, let me actually remove this. I'll duplicate them when I already have an image tag inside. So now let us say we have a source inside, which is for an image. Then I can duplicate this, right? Like this. Or let us even have can we have only 4 items? 1, 2, 3, 4. Just create a simple gallery. So now we shall put in here a folder of images. Now we just need to grab 4 images. Remember, I told you to be using Unsplash. I should have done this before, but I always do this so that you can also see this. I'll take this image using Unsplash. This one, wherever you see a lock, it means it's paid for. I'll take also this one. This image you're seeing here, this display, this is grid layout. Can you see? It is grid layout. So you can try to do the same thing with grid layout. So I'll also take this one. Do I have 4? I have 3. Let me have the 4th one, this one. Oh, I have 5 now. Let me cancel this. So let us be writing some other things as we are waiting for the images to download. So now, how should we start our gallery CSS? I'm waiting for you guys to tell me. Mm-hmm.
We should start with a container
How are we going to name that container?
dot gallery.
Let me do this actually. We are going to create this. You can always copy this and paste this here. And then you will start with a display of grid, not flex, right? Then after the display of grid, we can have in a grid template columns. And now here, I'm going to show you something very different from what we used before, and that is more professional, and that you will use to prevent you guys from actually using the grid template rows. So here I can use something like this. I'll tell you what it means. I will explain every line. So I can use a function. So I'll first of all use the function of repeat, right? So there is a function of repeat. Then I'll do auto fit. As our first argument, it is written as auto fit like this. Then I'll also do min max. So you need to always understand this and cram this the way they're written, because sometimes you won't get any citations on this. So I've just done 150 and also one fraction. I'll tell you why. Remember, we can use on columns fractions because this now makes it easier, because when we are dealing with rows, we are dealing with the width, right? Because the more rows, the more it will affect the width. Let me show you that, because I want you guys to understand this. The more rows, do you know why this Excel sheet is scrollable horizontally? Because we have many rows. It is not because because we have many columns. It is not because we have these rows. We can scroll down because we have a lot of rows. But if we scroll horizontally, it's because we have a lot of columns. And horizontally, that is the thing that affects the width of your screen or your device. So that is why I'm talking about width. We can use fractions when we are dealing. You can of course use fractions when you're dealing with rows, but it won't help as it will help when you're using columns, because you want your things to be responsive. So now, let me explain this, what it means. So first of all, the repeat function, as we said, this will help you to repeat the same things. It will repeat these things multiple times, right? So, and now the autofit, this keyword autofit. So this keyword tells the grid to actually make sure it automatically calculates how many columns can fit in a container, how many columns can fit from here up to the end. If they are more than the width of your screen, they will now be moved down, which will compensate for the rows. That is why when we use this, we don't need any grid template rows, because this one is going to handle that. When the columns you have can't fit your container, they will automatically go down and formulate what we call a row, right? So now, the minimax. The minimax means that it has two parameters. The first parameter, which is 150. So this one is the minimum width. Let me first explain the minimax. So minimax is a combination of minimum and maximum. Isn't it easy? So which means this one is the minimum and this is the maximum, right? So this will be the minimum width of each column. So it means the minimum width will be 150 and the maximum width will be one fraction. So it means if we have a bigger screen, it will now use one fraction. If we have a smaller screen, it will use 150, right? Which can also mean this: if we have fewer items, it will use one fraction so that it maintains the proportionality. If we have large images, it is now going to use 150, right? How will it know that you have fewer images or a lot of images? If it has images that are four, like right now we have 4 images, just get like the way my screen is right now. If you get 150 times 4 images, trust me, they won't fit on the whole screen. That is why it will now go straight to using 1FR. But if we had a mobile phone, it will now use this one, right? So this will help you in responsiveness. And please read more about AutoFit and Minimax. It will help you. So now I'll choose to go along with this. And now I can also put in some grid gap. Why did I use grid gap? Grid gap is a combination of column gap and row gap, right? Before we used row gap and column gap, but when you use grid gap, it means it will work for both column gap and row gap, right? It's a shorthand of both. So now let us also put in some padding. And let us stop from here. And now we put in our images to see how it will look like. Because right now, it won't look, let me open this in our browser. Right now, it will just look like, the reason why it had to open the index, whenever you open Go Live from the CSS, it will automatically look for a file called index.html, and that is what is going to open. So please always go live when you're inside the document, this document you want to open. Now, if I click go live, it will open my gallery.html. You can see that. Right now, I don't see anything because I don't have my images put in here. So let me put in my images now. I hope they are all downloaded. So I'll just come here on downloads. Now I'll just grab all these images, the 4 images. I'll bring them here and here, then inside here. So I'll just name the first one as image 1, then the second one as image 2, and the third one as image 3. Guys, bear with me. The session is taking too long, but I want us guys to make sure that we finish HTML by next week. By next week, we need to finish up anything related with HTML and CSS so that the next week, but 1, we can start with JavaScript. And that is actually giving you a warning, but you should be done with your portfolio in relation to HTML and CSS. So now, yes, now let us put in our images. So putting in images here, it's simple. We go on images, then we'll just go with image 1. I can actually copy the source. I'll be changing this, and this will be image 2, and this will be. When you have images that don't have the same extension, please make sure you look at the extension. Extension, I mean, the image might be PNG or might be JPG or might be JPEG. JPEG is the same as JPG. So, and it can also be WebPeg, something like that. So there are so many extensions related to images. You can read more about that. So now I've now brought in my images, but when I go to my browser, you can see how they look like. Very ugly because they're not styled. We don't have a width to the images and so on. So now let us try and put there some width to my images. So my images, I'll just go ahead and give my grid items also some styles, like, let me say gallery item. I'll copy the same class to all the children because I want to style all the children at once, right? Yes. So now I'll come here and now start styling my gallery item. And then I can do this, but it is always a good practice to make sure that if you have a child inside the parent, because this image is a child of this, right? So please always make sure you specify the class or any other thing, the ID or whatever of that parent, and then move on like this with the child. This will affect directly the child, right? Like this. And now you can write in your styles here. We are doing this without the dot because the image img is a tag. We don't need to put there any symbol, right? Then we can put there the width. We can have a width of 100%. And now we can have a height of auto. This will ensure responsiveness, and then we can do a display of block. The reason why we want to display block, it's because we want to display an image after the other, right? So the reason why we didn't study about display block, because you mostly not use it. Because even you can have your images display block, most of the elements that can be displayed in a block way. But if you want to enforce it, you just say display block. There is inline, there is also block, right? So now, after styling our image, let us try to see how it will look like. Can you see how it looks now? It looks better, right? Right now, it even looks like a gallery. We are making sure that the image is not getting stretched, right? And what is making it not stretched? It is that we are giving it a width of 100%. It is obtaining its width and making sure we adjust the height in reference to the width. When we do a height of auto, it will always reference to the width and make sure the image is well displayed, right? But before we finish up that, we can do more with this. We can even actually arrange these as we want, right? So maybe let us also put there some styles. I also want you guys to understand these styles. Like let us do a gallery item again. We just want this to be applicable on gallery items. So whenever you have images and are being put in a div or in a container, please always make sure you kind of use overflow. I want you guys to know this. Overflow should always be set to hidden. It is that even by mistake, if it happens by mistake, and your image tries to go out of your borders or out of your boundaries, it should be hidden, right? So let me show you where this one is important. Let me comment this one and just have some border radius on these divs. Let me have some border radius of 50 pixels. Can you see the border radius? The border radius, what it does, it will curve the edges. Can you see them? You can't see them. Do you know why you're not seeing them? Because your image will exceed the boundaries. So therefore, you need to say whatever overflows out of the boundaries of these divs should be hidden. So if you comment this out, you can see now it will be hidden. Can you see how it was now curved? Can you see that? Right? I hope you can see that how it was hidden. So now, you can even actually try to play around with this gallery and try to see how it would work with the responsiveness. You can see it will now arrange itself. The reason why it is arranging itself, it is because we are using this, right? This will maintain us a good responsiveness. So if you want your images also to be at the same height and width, you can always come and specify the height here. Without putting there auto, you can always specify the height. Maybe you can say the height should be 300 pixels. So if you specify the height at 300 pixels, you can see how it will look like. But some images will be stretched. Can you see? But again, specifying the height helps because you'll be maintaining your images at the same level. So, but the images will be straight. So avoiding the stretching, you will come and style the image with what we call object fit and say cover. This one, we did it last time when we were using images. Object fit will allow you to make sure that your images cover well your displays. You can see now they look perfect. Even though you can't even see that they look perfect, you need to put it there because your eyes might be having some problem, you know? People look differently. So now, if we have the same height and we try to minimize this, you can see they're actually arranging themselves and the images too look fine. We can remove this border radius. We can remove this one and you see how it will look like. You can see now how it is looking well, right? The images look well even on mobile devices. On this device, it will look like this, on the larger ones, and so on. Can you see how it is being responsive? Because we are saying if we see that the container of our screen is smaller, use this width. If it is bigger, if the screen is bigger, then go for this, because this one will make sure that they are all given the same proportion, right? So now we can also play around with the other things. Let us play around with the same things we were doing. Let us say I want now this image to come and occupy this one, this whole thing. So I want my image to come and, so this is the first one. This is the first child. I want it to have a grid column, right? It will start from 1 up to, it will start from here to 3, up to 3, right? So you can see now how it looks, right? And why didn't this one move down? It didn't move down because it is still in this range. We can still have all of this fit here, but if we try to decrease and it becomes smaller, you can see it will move down. Can you see how it is beautiful? And it is maintaining responsiveness without putting in any efforts.
I have
So,
a question.
yes, please.
I didn't understand like the way the objective fit works.
So the object fit, let me try to show you how object fit would work. So I wish we would have a separate image. Let us try to put a separate image outside here so that you can see how it usually works. So this one is going to, so let me just do div. Let me put it outside that. Let me put it, I want to style it alone like this one. Can you see how it is big? So let me give it a class. Let me just use images like this. Because image, this one image, it won't affect, but it might affect the other images. Let me use a class of images, standalone image, like this. If I come and use this class, let me use ID, in fact, so that I can show you how I can also use ID. So I'll use it like this. Now, this image, let me give it a width of 200 pixel and the height of 100 pixel. Do you see this image? Let me try to give it a height of 500. Do you see how this image looks? Can you see how it, doesn't it look straight? It is not looking clear.
Yeah.
Let me give it a more with this visible like this. Still it is stretched, right? Even if I give it even a width of 600 like this, it will look stretched. Can you see how this person is stretched? Can you see how the camera looks? Can you see that?
Yeah.
Give it a more 800 like this. Can you see this now clearly? It is stretched in a way.
Yes.
If you want to remove this behavior, this is where now you're going to bring in object fit. Now you put in, there is object fit contain. So the contain will make sure that it brings the whole width and height of an image and contains it in that specific section. But again, it won't have the effect. It won't have the other width and height. Can you see that? That we specified here. So that is why we always need to use cover. Cover will make sure it covers this width and height and also makes sure that the image is not stretched. But some sections will be cut out. So can you see now how it was done very well? It is not stretched right now. If you remove it, let me show you. Can you see?
Yes. It's
If we put it back there, can you see how it was made very well? So that is what object cover does. So object fit also has what we call object position. You can position your image. You can either position your image to be top So now it will focus on the top. Do you see how it focused on the top of the image? You can use to focus on the bottom. You will see how it will now focus on the bottom. That is why you're seeing stance of the camera. You can also choose to focus on the center. And this is the default usually, because they already know that every image you'll be using, you will need it to focus to the center. Right?
Yeah.
So every image you would use, you will need it to focus to the center. So that is why they usually make the center, the object position in the center. So now you have learned how you can always make your images very clear. So I hope everything is now clear. And you can please go on and try to create a gallery that looks more like this one. Can you see this? Try to create a gallery that looks more like this one. I know it might involve some JavaScript, but you can, it's some simple JavaScript. Because the reason as to why we can see something like this, they're not saying every image should be this and that, because they don't even know what images will be displayed here, because these images are coming from a certain backend, whereby they don't know the number of images that will come up. So they make sure they use JavaScript to kind of index the images. So, but it's okay. Just play around with some simple gallery with just some row height, which is different, and some grid column height, which is different. The same way we're doing for this. Try to play around with all of that. So, and if we start with the grid row, this session is also being recorded. I will upload it in a moment. Our grid row, you can go through it. I know we've learned a lot of things. Normally, our row is, and some people are left behind, but please try to go. It is only this grid item and understand everything. You can even ask later on. If it is on the second row, it means it will move down. I will explain. Its head down. So, but it is occupying only one row. Thanks everyone. But if we give it a second one, like let's say 200 pixel, let us see how now it will look like. So let me see. So grid row, we are now targeting. Let us first make sure that we change the background to see if we are targeting the same thing. Yes, we are targeting the same thing. And we just want to make sure that its grid row changes now. So if we try to specify the 200 without using the fraction, would it work, or we can opt to use the fraction? This question goes to you guys, because you have already understood how to use fractions, and as well as some pixels. Would this work? I need somebody to answer this from the audience. Would you use fractions? Would you use indexes? Would you use, like, why are we putting here 200 pixels and we don't see another 200 pixel added, because we should have another 200 pixel added? Is it how it should work? So I want you guys to differentiate units, indexes, and fractions. So here we are trying what grid rows and grid columns do. It is trying to now look at the items and see how it can give them a larger size or a smaller size compared to the others. So this means we shall use indexes. So if we want to specify, like we want to make sure that let's say our grid row, if we put there a 2, you can see now how it is now going to look like. Did you see that? Now we just specified that our grid row needs to be a must, that the grid row should be 2. Can you see that? Should I repeat this, or?
Yeah.
So what grid row does, let me try to give you a definition of this. So what grid row is going to help us, it is going now to change the normal behavior we have up here in the template, right? For both grid row and grid template, I mean grid column, they are now going to help us to change the default behaviors we have in our normal styling from the templates, right? So, but the way grid rows are made, we make sure that we also specify other characteristics. Like we can clarify another parameter aside, but we come to this later on because it is more complex. You need to first understand what grid row and grid columns does, right? So now let us remove this row and we put there a grid column. So for a grid column, let me just say for the first child, the grid column. For the first child, you understand this is grid 1, and you can see it is here. So I want now to specify a grid column, let's say a grid column of maybe 4. Can you see this behavior? Somebody explain to me what happened. So I need you guys to be able to look at an illustration and explain what has happened. Do we have somebody to volunteer on this? We are just moving things. You can obviously see that, right? We had column 1, column 2, column 3. We have moved it to column 4. Can you see that? Right? Can you hear me, guys?
Yes.
So we have moved it to column 4. So now let us try to do the same thing on another thing and we see how it would look like. Let us do the same thing on maybe our last child, which is item 4. So is there anything that is going to happen? Why didn't we see any change? Because we have said we are moving it to column of 4. Why didn't we see any change? This is obvious. I need somebody from you guys to answer this. Why didn't we see any change if we moved this last item to a column of 4?
Because it was already in
It's
column
already
4.
in column 4, right? Easy. So now, let me ask somebody else this question. So if now we do, let me ask somebody, let me check those who are present. Let me ask Ezekiel. Mic check, Ezekiel. Mic check,
Yes,
Ezekiel.
I can hear you.
So now, if we come and if we want to specify the item to this one, first of all, which CSS property should we use here? Or pseudo property that we should use here so that we target this grid item too.
Sorry, I don't have an idea.
Oh my God, let me repeat all of this. Let me repeat this, right? So before we introduce the grid row and grid column, let me hope you understand this. For items to be considered as grid layout, we need to have a display of grid. And we can also have the items in rows and columns. We can use templates, rows and template columns. For templates, you will need to specify the height of, let's say, your row and the width of your column. Because for the row, it is the height. For the column, it's the width, right? So this repeat function is used to repeat a process. If we do not put here repeat like this, we should have 200 pixel, 200 pixel, space 200 pixel, then 200 pixel, like this. It will still work, right? So, but again, we want to use repeat so that we can repeat the same process because it appears the dimensions we are giving are the same, right? That is why we can still achieve the same thing. And the same applies here. The reason why we use ratios is we want to achieve a responsiveness on columns because columns are related to the width. For the rows, because are related to the height, we didn't care about the height because somebody can scroll down. If the height becomes longer, you can always scroll down. Like if let's say we have more items here, we can always, let me put more items here like this. we can always scroll like this. Can you see this? We can always scroll. And if they exceed four rows, you can see they change their height because we only specified 4 rows to be 200 pixels, right? So let me undo this so that we can stay with only 4. So now we can always insert in some gaps within columns and as well within the row. So this was targeting our container containing some grid items, but as well, we can also style the grid items by using grid item class. So right here, I just did the background, and now I said I was going to just now target some specific items, which said if we want to target an item 1, because we already know all these 4 are children, right? So if we want to target this item 1, there is a pseudo property. I don't know how to read this, but you can always find out the way we read this. Pseudo, it is like this, something like this, right? This is how we call them. These are properties that can either be inserted by using either a colon or 2 semicolons like this. So, but most of them are only with 1 colon. So now we can always use a property called first child.